Hi, everybody. Just want to talk about Brazil making lots of news on the back of a Supreme Court 4-1 ruling that former President Jair Bolsonaro is now going to be seized 27 years of jail time, sentenced guilty for efforts to overturn a free and fair election through a military coup plot. Which included a plot to assassinate now President Lula. Much more serious in all of those charges than what we saw in the United States on January 6th, but the January 8th events in Brazil are similar in one fundamental way. And that is that your response to how you feel about this verdict and whether or not Bolsonaro should see jail time is almost completely determined about how you feel politically about Bolsonaro and about Lula. Are you on the right? Are you on the left? And who do you like? It has nothing to do with rule of law. It has nothing to do with the facts of the case. It has everything to do with tribal political affiliation, which, of course, is, the beginnings of the end when it comes to having an effective representative democracy. Now, this 27-year jail term is not going to be overturned. There's a lot of talk that amnesty should be provided among Bolsonaro's advisors and indeed his chief of staff. One of the arguments is that coup plotters in the past have been forgiven, have had amnesty, and so why not now? There will be amnesty in Brazil. I think it is going to pass, but only for junior figures, not the senior-most political and military leaders that were involved. So it does look to me like Bolsonaro is going to see jail, at least unless and until in upcoming elections in Brazil, whoever is the favored candidate of the former president is able to win. And that's, at this point, kind of a coin flip. Couple things that are worth talking about here. First is that this process has made Lula a little bit more popular. And that's in part because the United States is coming after Brazil pretty hard in punishing the Brazilian economy and the Brazilian government for deciding, having the temerity to take on a former political leader that Trump likes. And Bolsonaro's son, Eduardo, has been spending a lot of time in the United States. He's very aligned with MAGA. He's been making lobbying efforts to try to ensure that leaders in Brazil have an or else from the United States if they continue to go after his dad. That has been effective in engendering support for that position from Trump and from the White House, but it's caused huge backlash in Brazil. Not as much as we've seen in Canada, not as much as we've seen in Australia, but nonetheless significant, and Lula's probably slightly more than 50% likely to win, in part because the United States has decided that they want to interfere in Brazil's political system and their sovereignty. Now, beyond that, what the U.S. is doing is significantly expanding tariffs on Brazil. They're also using the Magnitsky Act to take visas away from Supreme Court justices. I expect that sanctions, tariffs, and other executive orders are going to be expanded on the back of this 27-year ruling, sentencing in the coming days and weeks. And it's also clearly illegal. The IEPA framework that has been used by President Trump to determine that there is a national emergency and that indeed gives him the ability, not Congress, to put tariffs on individual countries. It is very clear. I mean, there's a strong argument to be made more broadly that if you put tariffs on Lesotho, a tiny, really, really poor country, there's no national emergency. But it's very clear that when you are putting tariffs on a country where you're running a trade surplus, where there's no claim that there is the U.S. national security at stake, it's purely that Trump is supporting a friend of his in Brazil. And if the Supreme Court rules whether it's narrowly or broadly on IEPA, you have to think that what we're seeing in Brazil is going to be pushed back for further discussion or overturned. But the interesting secondary point here is that Brazil is doing everything they can to hedge away from the United States, to decouple so that the U.S. government will never be able to have the same kind of punitive impact on Brazil that the Brazilians are facing right now. And that means speeding up the negotiations between Brazil, Mercosur, more broadly, South American Trade Agreement, and the EU, which had otherwise been stalled. Also EFTA, which is a smaller non-EU trade grouping, including Switzerland and others. ASEAN, speeding up. India, trade relations with Brazil, speeding up. China's trade relations with Brazil, speeding up. China's now buying a lot more soybean from Brazil as opposed to the United States. And that's hurting American farmers. I see this with countries all over the world, whether allies or neutral or adversaries, saying that the U.S. cannot be counted on, is not reliable, and so we want to have less exposure to the U.S. long term. But nowhere, in my view, is it more obvious than the dramatically changing trade relations of Brazil, where they're not just facing a big tariff hit post-Liberation Day, but they also see now the United States as their principal large-scale adversary taking on their political system. Now, if the right comes in Brazil and they're aligned with Trump, things are going to feel very, very different. But for now, that is not the case. And for now, the U.S. is weaponizing trade and their ability to take their much more powerful position to hurt another country economically because they don't like what they're doing in politics. It's very far from the free market, but that ship has sailed a long time ago, and that's where we are with U.S. and with Brazil. That's it for me, and I'll talk to you all real soon.